Alright, welcome back to Illustrator Lesson 3, creating and editing shapes. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to go to File, New, and then I'm going to go ahead and give it a title. I'm going to call mine Home Sale Demo. And I'm going to use the print profile since this is ultimately going to go to print. I want 2 artboards. I want to make sure that they're arranged by row because I want my artboards to be, in a row. I'm going to go ahead and change my units to inches. And I want my artboard to be 1 inch apart. And I want to go ahead and change the width of my page to just be 8 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Oh, actually, one other thing I want to do in here. I want to change my bleed as well, and a bleed is just sort of the area around the outside of a document that you're going to put any items or any part of your drawing or design that you actually want to bleed off of the page. And the standard bleed is 1.25 inches, which is 1/8 of an inch. And then I'll go ahead and say OK. And so now you'll see that I actually have 2 documents, 2 artboards, which are sort of akin to pages. And I have that red line on the outside is that bleed line. So anything that I actually want to go off the edge of my page, I want to actually make it go to my bleed line. And once I've done that, I want to go ahead and save this document. So I'm going to go ahead and go File, Save. And since I've already given it a name, I just need to choose where it's going to go, and I just want mine to go on my desktop. So I'm going to go ahead and say Save. And just say OK to this. And now my document's created and saved. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and reset my work areas to make sure that I'm seeing exactly what you're seeing, and vice versa. So I'm going to go up and I'm going to go to Window, Workspace Essentials. That should be selected. If it's not, go ahead and select it. And then you want to go to Window, Workspace, Reset Essentials. So that's going to take it back to just the default Essentials workspace. And now we're going to talk a little bit about drawing modes. First, a drawing mode, and to see that, I'm going to go ahead and make my toolbar 2 columns instead of 1. So you'll see at the bottom of the toolbar there are 3 drawing modes. The first one is Draw Normal, the second one is Draw Behind, and the third one is Draw Inside. And basically the way that works, the Draw Normal mode is the way that Illustrator works by default and has worked for a long time. Basically every object that you draw in Illustrator is stacked on top of each other. So the very first object you drew is going to be on the very bottom of the stack. Each subsequent object is going to be in front of it. The Draw Behind mode, this next option, will actually allow you to create an object that's actually going to be behind existing objects in the stacking order. So it actually reverses it. So it'll continue to place, if you have one object that you've drawn, the second object will be behind that object, the third object will be behind all the other objects, and so on. And then the last one is Draw Inside. This allows you to basically use an existing object as a clipping mask so that no matter where you draw, it's only going to fill the interior of that shape. And that actually becomes a really useful feature. Let me go ahead and zoom out again for you, and we'll just start drawing some basic shapes. So this first one that we're going to do, we're just going to draw a basic rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to choose my rectangle tool. I'm going to click and drag out a rectangle in my document, and you'll see that it gives me a tooltip in the bottom right hand corner of my document, or of my rectangle, where it says the width and height of my rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and let go, and you'll see that I've actually drawn my rectangle. And to change the color, the fill, and the stroke, I'm going to go ahead and go over to my color panel, which should be that very topmost panel. And I'm going to go ahead and show my options, and then you'll see the stroke is the outline around it, the fill is the sort of the interior space. And I'm going to go ahead and change my fill to green, and then I'm going to choose my stroke, and I'll go ahead and change that to something in the red spectrum. And if I go ahead and zoom in on my object, you'll see that I have a green rectangle with a red stroke around it. And we go ahead and actually make that stroke a little thicker for you so that you can see it a little better. So there you go. I've created my very first shape and changed the color or the fill and the stroke for it. So now I'm going to go ahead and zoom out. And I'm going to make another rectangle. So I'm going to choose my rectangle tool, and then I'm just going to click in my interface. And you'll see when I do that it actually gives me an option to type in exactly what size rectangle I want it to be. So let's say I want to have a 2" by 2" rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And it automatically drew a rectangle for me to those exact specifications. And if I want to create a copy of that shape, like I have this perfect rectangle, I'm going to go ahead and hold down my Option key on a Mac or an Alt key on the PC. So again, Alt key on PC and Option on a Mac. I'm going to click and drag and drop my rectangles, and it makes a perfect copy of each shape. So if you have a shape that you want to keep duplicating, it's very easy to do that. And so now I'm going to go ahead and save, so Command S. I'm going to start drawing some other shapes. Alright, so let's move on. We've drawn some rectangles, now we're going to draw a rounded rectangle. To do that, I'm going to go ahead and go back to my rectangle tool, click that until I get the rounded rectangle tool underneath it. And now I'm just going to do a very similar thing. So I'm going to click and drag out a rounded rectangle. And the thing that's a little bit different about this is while I'm still drawing it, I hit the up arrow key, you'll see that it rounds the corners of my rectangle even more. If I hit my down arrow key, it will make those corners sharper. So there it gives you a lot of options on actually changing the parameters of your drawing that you're creating. Alright, so we've drawn a rounded rectangle and a regular rectangle. Now we're going to draw an ellipse. So I'm going to go back to my shape tools, going to go to the ellipse tool, and I'm going to go ahead and draw out another ellipse. And something that's interesting to know about this that also applies to the other shapes is if you hold down the shift key, it will actually constrain your proportions. So it will keep that width and height the same way, so that way you can easily draw squares, you can easily draw circles. The other thing that's useful about this is if you hold down the space bar, you can actually move the shape around while you're drawing it. And if you hold the Alt key on a PC or the Option key on a Mac, you can actually cause your shape to be drawn from the middle instead of where you clicked. So you can constrain the proportions, you can make it draw from either the center or the outside, and you can actually move it around. So those are very, very useful tools. And then one last tool is the polygon tool. This allows you to draw other shapes besides rectangles and circles. So as you draw the shape out, as you hit the down arrow key, it will create less sides on your polygon. As you type your up arrow key, it will create more shapes. And you can dynamically change that until you actually let go of the shape, and then you have your shape drawn. And then we're going to move to that draw behind mode that I talked about a little bit ago. So I'm going to go ahead and shift to draw behind. And now I'm going to create actually a star. And I'm going to draw it behind those other shapes I just drew. Normally if I drew something it would go in front of it. Since I switched to draw behind, it's going to draw it behind it. So I'm going to choose the star tool. And I'm going to go ahead and click and drag it out. And if I hit the up arrow key, it will increase the number of points of my star. As I hit the down arrow key, it will decrease. And you'll see once I do that, that it actually drew it behind that previous object that I actually just drew. So it was in front of this object because this was lower in the stacking order, but it's behind the most recent object that I drew. And let's say I want to change my stroke width. By default, everything starts with a 1-point stroke, since I had changed this stroke weight in the stroke menu before. I can go ahead and change this stroke weight, which is just the stroke, is just the outline around the outside. If I want to change the weight, I can change it here in the stroke menu, just, clicking to be more, clicking to be less. Also, conveniently, when you have an object selected, it shows up in the control panel as well. So I can change that same stroke weight in the control panel. And the other thing that's useful about the stroke panel, if I go ahead and show options, is that you can change how the stroke actually aligns. And let me choose, let's go ahead and zoom in on this rectangle. So you'll see with the stroke that right now, the stroke is aligned to the center. So there's half of the stroke weight is on one side of the line, half the stroke weight is on the other side. You can also change it to align the stroke to the inside so that all the stroke weight, so all, say, 5 points, which happens to be the size of that stroke, will be inside the predetermined shape of your object. You can also choose align stroke to outside, which does exactly the opposite. All of the stroke weight is outside of the defined line of your object. Most of the time I just leave mine, on that first align stroke to center, but depending on what I'm drawing, I may change that. And then let's go ahead and look at the width tool. The width tool is really nice because it allows you to draw non-uniform stroke weights. And the width tool is, I guess it's the, let's see, the 8th tool down in your column. It kind of, to me, looks like an ear of corn or something, but it's not what it is. So if I go ahead and select that, it will allow me to change the stroke weight of my object. So if I go ahead and I click and draw a point on my stroke, I can go ahead and actually change the width of my stroke so I can have sort of a more gestural shape. If I draw that point and hold down the Option key, it'll allow me to actually change just one side. Or I'm sorry, if you're on a Mac, it's an Option key. If you're on a PC, it's the Alt key. It will actually allow me to affect just one side of my stroke at a time. Otherwise, without that Alt or Option key down, it changes them both at the same time. So again, this stroke weight is a really nice way to add a much more gestural line quality to your drawings. And if you double click on one of those points, it will actually give you an editor. If you want a specific measurement that you actually want to type in, you can do that very easily. So let's say I want my total width to be 0.5 inches, and I want side 2 to be, let's say side 1 to be 0.4. And I want side 2 to be, say, 0.1. It will automatically change that specific width points to be those things. If I say OK, it'll actually commit the changes. So there's one last tool I want to show you in this lesson, and it's called the Shape Builder tool. So the first thing you want to do to use this is actually select multiple overlapping shapes. So let's say, I have these 3 rectangles, or I'm sorry, 2 squares. And I want to combine those into one shape. So what I can go ahead and do is select my 2 squares, and then go up to my Shape Builder tool, which is Shift-M, or it's sort of the 2 circles with an arrow that's right below the tool that we just used, which was the width tool. And when I do that, you'll see that I can click and drag over multiple objects. And you'll see as I click and drag, it gives me a little line and it gives me sort of various parts of the shape that highlight. When I do that, it automatically merges those shapes that I selected. So it's a very easy way to combine shapes into each other. And then one other drawing mode that I want to show you is called the draw inside mode, which is what we talked a little bit about earlier. I'm going to go ahead and, actually, let me switch back to my selection tool. Just sort of move this out of the way. I'm going to go ahead and draw another ellipse. And this time, I'm going to actually draw a shape inside of it. So I'm going to leave my ellipse selected because that's going to essentially serve as the clipping mask or the area in which I'm allowed to draw or that I can draw. And I'm going to switch now to draw inside, which is that third drawing option that we haven't used yet. You'll see when I do that, it kind of gives me this sort of area, these dotted lines that sort of denote the corners of my object. And now if I want to say, like, you know, what if I wanted to put a rectangle inside of that circle? I can go ahead and draw out my rectangle. And the only part that's going to show is the part that's actually inside of my square. Or I'm sorry, my ellipse that I've selected. And so that way it's a really nice way to kind of, you know, use this as the shape that I'm actually drawing inside of. Or like, let's say, you know, I wanted to draw some sort of a pattern. I can do that. And you'll see that the only part of the pattern that actually shows up, you know, I can draw anywhere that I want to draw. Once I let go, the only thing that actually shows up is the part that is inside of it. So it's a nice way to kind of add texture to an object or add a drawing sort of inside of another shape. And then I'm going to go ahead and switch back to draw normal. And those are sort of the high points of lesson 3. Please make sure that you go through the book, that you save all your work, and that you upload your files to Blackboard. And I will see you for lesson 4.